아들이 쇼게 하면서 나 제름 지게 가르 안sol야 랍자 롭된 가르 나와래라네 다 람림 뒤진 세디 안 가서 람림사 알 장주 람든 나라야 안에 산지 유송럽게 된다 니버쳐서 뒤지체 안 된셔 바래 지나다 람든려야 가서 최섬 곰숨제 롭종 제바이나 안에 벤 파인 랍체사야다 안 소사나게 체딜야 안 지게 개와 주변도 안 개와 치마다 하다 미고 바터바나 탈바다 탐지 기벽고 원토야기 파인 바도 매바 아니 사투고레스 디엔자네 자주람든리아 퇴섬곰숨 제호레센 나뭐 디소르와 나네 퇴섬곰숨 간에 제호레 람나 안다 당보 안에 계위신 안에 계위신 된수디 안에 냠는 제호레 사다 온도스네 아니 소르와.
Good afternoon. So this morning, we continue to look at this text by Lama Tsongkhapa. And this morning, the advice that he gave to us was that the text that this text is part of a tradition of, that of the lamp on the path to enlightenment, within that, all the Buddhist sutras and teachings, the essential meaning of all the Buddhist teachings are to be found. The entire meaning of the Buddha Dharma is to be found within the lamp to the path of enlightenment. Therefore, if we train well in the practices presented there will be immeasurable benefits in our future lives. Huge stores of merit will be accumulated, good rebirths will be assured, as well as rapid progression to the achievement of liberation and enlightenment. So then how to train? And here, Geshe then advised us how to rely on a spiritual teacher, the foundation of all good qualities.
지나다 기위신이 검주 간스 검고고래 람나 아니 기위신이 아니 구송 투숨게 연대 젠비 토네 연대 삼다 안데라 기위신이라 대바지지도 지네 대바 검야다 아니 되네 기위신이 소소라게다 취시 라미가 취된바자 기위신이 그진제제베 맞아 그진제부이 당아 탈바다 탐지 캠프 동아 타달려 저지 탈바다 탐지 캠프 람된제 될야 야 닌띵이 대화도 토벌 집에 탑띵거래 섬지 않는 데야 안 그리 제수 돼야다 안다 저기 라말이야 안 저기 견다에 로디게 균이 기죽음에 셈비게 삼로지 바 안두스네 견다에 삼로지 균이 기죽음에 셈비게 견도게 삼로 송야데 두스전에 삼다 고미야디 다 기회신이 검수시고래 진짜 기회신이 검세데 단 가르곰고래 간스 공부래라도 다 도나디래 기회신이 구성도 연된제 한 기회신이래 대바장 되네 기회신이 꾀진제 안에 기회신이 양한 지로 지금 견대 로딩이 기주메 선비게 삼다디 야내야도 먼저 고미야디다 기회신이 검수시고래다 디 쇼게디 셰바래 단이바딜라 가르셰바스네 나중에 다이 먼저 단주기 밀류 림보치세데 안베 린진 가서 림보치래 자 채워래 쓰되 당한데 단주기 밀류 림보체 안에 검수시고래 니가르 공부해서 단주기 류데네 마시게 된다 채워 미김자 가르스네 된델라야 탈바다 탐지 캠페 람쳐서 냠는지 투고요 반자 된 채워래스 안 된다 침보래 대야 안에 톱가 와래스 그래서 규디게 죽가 와인자 안 규츠름소야다 진바 쇠베 안에 전주기 몰람 냠는지에 깔려 하고 인자 된자 된주기 밀루리 톱가 와래 배 톱나 된다 침보 쉬우지 선비기 두세네 삼다데 대야 안에 네 지글해라 와래스다 맞아 지게 치와 미다고 검수 시고 미다고 검수 시고 그래서 단 되네게 단주기 류된데까지 된차와 안에 톱가와 안에 도스점다야다 안에 치와미다 와서 겁나디 안디리 쇼회가도 디고 시바르다.
Moreover, this morning we looked at the very first training to engage in, having come to have a deep respect for the Lama tradition and a strong yearning to engage in its trainings, the first is presented as how to rely on a spiritual teacher. So Geshe Rinpoche is presenting this in exactly the same sequence as Lama Atisha did in his Lamp on the Path to Enlightenment. And how to rely on the teacher? What is the sequence of meditations one engages in? So first, one reflects on his tremendous qualities, the qualities of his body, speech, and mind. And one does so again and again so as to generate strong trust and confidence in one's teacher. And the purpose of this is so that we will want to seek out his teachings, we'll grab the opportunity to receive teachings whenever they come our way, and we'll make great endeavor to put them into practice, seeing them as personal instructions for ourselves, and thereby give rise to all the qualities of the Lamrim. The second meditation is reflecting on the great kindness of our teacher, who from lifetime to lifetime has studied and meditated with great vigor, all so that he can become a highly qualified being who can benefit us, who can lead us in the correct and unmistaken sequence of trainings to give rise to all the qualities of the path. So here we reflect on the great qualities, the great kindness of our teacher in this way. And as part of this too, reflect that through his teaching of us, through his guidance that he gives us, we will give rise to all the qualities of the path within our own continuum too. So this is the second aspect of the kindness of the teacher. First was his endeavors, and secondly, through guiding us, we will gain great realizations. And then the third aspect to meditate on here is to ensure that we don't allow our mind to dwell on any perceived faults, but rather, when we do perceive faults, to remind ourselves that this is an opportunity presented for us to transform our way of thinking, for us to overcome our own faults, and to transform this perception on the path. So these are the three meditations here in how to rely on the spiritual teacher. We need to reflect on this again and again. Then the second meditation we looked at this morning was to recognize the great opportunity that we have achieved in this life. We have achieved a precious human rebirth, a life of leisure, meaning a life that is freed from the tremendous sufferings of the lower realms, or a life freed of being overcome by the sensory pleasures of the God realms. And here this meditation has again three steps. The first is to recognize the great meaning that this life has, the potential within this life. Merely achieving it doesn't mean we'll live a life of great meaning, but has that potential, and it's for us to take that meaning. And the potential is that this is the supreme basis, this precious human rebirth is the supreme basis, the unsurpassable basis for achieving liberation and enlightenment. And this is the first point to reflect on. The second is how difficult it was to attain this life, how difficult it was to achieve this precious human rebirth. And this precious human rebirth is a result. And this result was difficult to achieve because the causes, the 5 causes, were difficult to achieve. These causes of practicing excellent ethical restraint, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and stainless prayers. But we have done so. We have done so, and we've done so well, and we can see that in the result we've achieved. So that then gives us strength of mind, knowing that we've done it already, and thereby we can have certainty we can do it again. The third point of the meditation is an exhortation to utilize what remains of this opportunity well, because it will pass in a blink of an eye. It will end sooner than we realize. There are so many causes that lead to this life ending, and so few to sustain it. So we need to use what remains of this life well. And those are the 3 steps here for the meditation on a precious human rebirth.
Dan da 가르쳐 디젤라 하는 가르님네 제거래서나 다 하는 거죠. 점도 제거래 해서 점도 냠네 다시 시고래.
This then brings us now to the next meditation, which is that of refuge.
That's it. 신의 안주를 미게 대매진 네 지교 권조 숨동에 대치를 잡로 신도 땜바다 네 랍자 냠바메 버자스.
In verse 15, there is no certainty that after death you will not be born in the lower realms. The protection from such terror lies in the three jewels alone. Therefore, make firm the practice of going for refuge and ensure that its precepts do not degenerate.
나도나 신의 안주를 미게 대매진 당하는 줄이야 당하는 줄이 진짜 이미 시루로 와다 제 시로반에 매바 책을 말해 직계와 실링고래 다계와 랭어도 아니 신의 계와 랭나 가와 링고르스네 야는 안줄이 계와 링고래 야는 덴줄이 계와 링고래 계와 랭선이마도 요 말다 제가 덴줄 야는 덴줄 계와 링고 야는 안줄 계와 링고래 제가 다 덴줄 계와 랭아들라 안주게 계위래 사네 덴줄 계와 링고래 디비래 사바네 미게 안소 계와 링고래 제가 당하는 줄이야 계와가만에 디바망고 사요 체델에 양안주기 나 계와야고 사매바나 당아주 시도바나 나는 안들이 기가 말해선 베기 안줄을 누버요 말팅 세요 말와 땡서요 말 그래서네 안주기 나들 미게기 가소래 계와 납친 마사바인자 제가 당아줄에 땡서요 말스다 제가다 신의 안줄 미게 땡매징스 제가 안줄 기가 말해선 베기 땡서요 말 제가 신의 제가 안줄 기시기를 해서 그래.
Looking at the first line, there is no certainty that after death you will not be born in the lower realms. So linking with the preceding verses, this precious life will end. It is impermanent. It will definitely end, and when it ends and how so is completely unknown. But there will come that time at any time when we take our last breath in this body and the next breath is in our next. And therefore, as we can have certainty that when death comes, we will take another rebirth. Where it is, this we have no direct control over. That rebirth is only going to be in one of two directions, either in the suffering lower realms or in an upper migration as a human or god. Whichever of those two it is, depends on our propelling karma, whether the imprint that ripens at the time of death is virtuous and thereby leading to a rebirth in an upper migration, or non-virtuous and thereby leading us to fall into the lower realms. And which of those two imprints ripens, a virtuous or non-virtuous one, is not something we have power over. We can't just wish for it to be a virtuous imprint. On our continuum, it's a vast store of imprints accumulated in countless past lives as well as already in this life. Whichever is the stronger, whether virtuous or non-virtuous, it will be whichever is stronger at the time of death, whether virtuous or non-virtuous. It is that will propel our rebirth. And therefore, there is a very real possibility that our next rebirth, in fact, our next breath, could be in the lower realms.
그래서 당한솔에 깨바이나 당한솔에 한솔에 끼기 말해서 메딩줘요 말해서 나도 깨왕아만이 디바먹고 사요 다대 디바 네 사고로 제가 다세텔이 양은 저기 냠면電사大den 한도 된주 밀류좀 톱요 때 된들이야 냠네 야구치 마도바 있나 맞아바 있나 한도 신에 아니 신시로 그래 되는 한솔에 끼기 말해서 메딩줘요 말아봤어 당한솔에 깨바이나 가르치기를 람나 당한솔에 깨바이나 둥아바도 둥아뇽거야래 안디 안 둥아뇽 거야 맞아 디갈이야 아니 가서요라 때래 가서 개화행념는 제대 개화사야서 배깔 하고 그랬어 지난 개화 베네냐와다 이다다 둔롤 개화는 개위 개화사에 배깔 하고 그랬어 지난 데네 개화 사마도 반 아니야 개화 디체마데 가서를 깨는 마다 딘롤이게 끼도야비 깔래 하고 싶으래자 지난 데네 인자다 가서들 미개와도 제구도 가서를 살고도 선배 삼을게도 당 가서를 끼비 뉴바데 수도 요래서나 다점네 건조 숨나 요래지 네 지교 건조 숨든 게서 나선 될 나좀 맞게 와지 나선도 끼비 뉴바데 술 요래서 점네 건조 숨보들 요래서 언데 안도 삼당 거래지
The position we find ourselves in is we have no valid basis to have confidence that our next rebirth will not be in the lower realms. We can't say with certainty that our next rebirth will not be there because of the power of non-virtuous karma on our continuum, and that we have no control over our next rebirth. Whichever imprint is strongest, at the time of death, it is that will propel us to our next rebirth. So therefore, with that recognition, we turn our mind towards the great need to accumulate virtue, because it's virtue, when that is the most powerful imprint on our continuum, that ensures a good rebirth in our next life. Therefore, we have to endeavor to accumulate virtue. Because should one fall into the lower realms, it's not just that the suffering is unbearable and unimaginable for us to even contemplate what it must be like. But once born there, it is so difficult to accumulate virtue. It's near impossible to do so because of the overwhelming strength of suffering. The suffering that one experiences overwhelms one, thereby making it very difficult to turn one's mind to virtue. Moreover, one lacks mental capacity. So therefore, we have to accumulate virtue now. Naturally, then our mind turns to, how can I gain protection from the possibility of falling into the lower realms? This brings us to the next line. The protection from such terrors lies in the three jewels alone.
Bana ngandol me ke deng me ma den se mi do ngandol ke ba ina ngandol dunga nye we ta di da ta an du du dunga pa do me bas ye dunga nyong we na de tin de la ge wa sa me ba ne nyam ne ja me ba cha gi du an de le da ta gu du san be ge sam lo chi ki de le ta gu san de le tu kyu be ge da de le ta ya di kyu kan di nu ba su lu yo re san kem ne kon jo su lo yo re san be ge da yi shi zhe ji du yi shi che di re san ni ba dang bo ni di ni de sam dang gu re di ni de an zo
What's being presented in these first two lines are the causes for generating refuge. So the first, we see in the first line, that after death there's a very real possibility that we may be born in the lower realms where the suffering is intense, and we cannot do anything about it once we're there, in that due to the power or the intensity of the suffering, it's very difficult to turn our mind towards virtue. Moreover, we lack mental capacity to be able to do that with ease. Not like the situation we find ourselves in now. So here, we need to cultivate this first cause for refuge, generating a great fear for that ripening effect of being born in the lower realms, and generate a strong determination to close that door of possibility of being reborn there in our next life. The second cause then is, having generated this determination not to be born in the lower realms, we think, how can we gain protection? Who can guide us to achieve protection? Here we generate conviction, trust that the three jewels and the three jewels alone can provide us with that protection. We generate this conviction that is through relying on the three jewels and only in that manner that we can attain freedom from the possibility of rebirth in our next life in the lower realms. So these are the two causes: fear of being born in the lower realms and trust and conviction in the three jewels, that they can provide protection.
tablam de ki chasan kingu ores chasan kengo korong nyama ne nyamlen chi nyamnyo yo ba za tap kane chikin dungol nga son le meje ke tablam gare chi ko tablam de chasan kingu ores chen ba na shi nga zo lia ani mano ma chu ba 배 잠바단 제위 원인 알아서 냠는 딩고레스 지나 딩신고레스 딩신 딩고레스 지나 니 대된장 안 쪽에 냠는 제알이야 냠는 제장 안 쪽에 상이게 땜바 나신 정한 쪽 냠는 제바 있나 안 쪽에 람줄에 계시네 안 타르바스 가서 녀모 빵배 곡된 세팅 안 쪽에 끼운 거레스 제상 안 쪽에 녀모 빵배 곡된 끼어나 깨와나 당하선에 탈사와레스 제 콜비 동아에 탈거를 타와레스 제상 되네 콜비 동아 용어야 말레스 제상 곡되는 것도 끼투고라고 제상 다 탈바세디 딩한주 냠는 진에 깨야리야 로봇 수직에서 개념 고쳐서 지고레스 그래서 개념 고쳐서 코론기 상지기 수바나 코론서 코론 냠는지 간에스 지고 차상 코론 냠녀요 유요레 제상 되네자 대래야 코론 잠바단 제와요 반자 개념 고쳐가 한줄이야 아니 아주게 마신 발에 발라비아당 혼두스엔 로봇이야들 로봇 수직을 개념 고쳐지기레스 제네자 한두스네 난 개념 고쳐 숨대라 아주 동안에 교비 누바디 여바디 디네레 삼도 두시네 저기 두시네 삼다디레 이제 디네 삼다제 하는 아주게 다 디네 교비 누바 건조스면 요래 섬이 이시시야디 이시 타지도 제고 해제
looks at then the two causes for giving rise to refuge. Then there are the three objects that one goes to refuge towards, the three jewels, which are the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, the Sangha jewel. So how is it that they have the power or they have the ability to provide us with protection from suffering? Well, to understand that, we look at what each of the three jewels are. The Buddha jewel refers to all the Buddhas, but here particularly we can think of Buddha Shakyamuni, a being who has achieved the state of perfection, where they perfected all good qualities and completely eradicated all faults. And the Buddha did this, Buddha Shakyamuni did this, by training in gaining great knowledge and the experience or realization based on that knowledge. And thereby, when achieved the state of perfection, the Buddha knew all the best techniques, the faultless techniques to achieve enlightenment. And based on his love and compassion, which are conjoined with his faultless love and compassion joined with perfected wisdom, he has no wish other than to guide us, to teach us how to practice those same unmistaken methods and thereby give rise to the same unmistaken results. So the Buddha jewel then is Buddha Shakyamuni, the Buddha, the perfected being who has perfect knowledge of all the techniques and due to his perfected love and compassion wants to share the complete and unmistaken path to achieve the same enlightened state as he did. That's the first jewel. The second is the Dharma jewel. And the Dharma jewel refers to the realizations in the minds of the great beings, and in particular, what we therefore strive to emulate within ourselves. Because the Dharma jewel is the cessation of suffering. It's true cessations and true paths. So this is what we strive to develop in ourselves. And true cessations, which are achieved by cultivating true paths or the mental paths, is where one attains complete freedom from the afflictions together with their seeds. And that is the state where one can no longer suffer, because the causes of suffering are eradicated. So the Dharma jewel exists in the continuum of the other jewels. And this is what we strive to develop in ourselves, because it is these realizations within ourselves, that provides the actual protection. And the third jewel, the Sangha jewel, these are our companions on the path. These are those who are training. They refer specifically to Arya beings who have given rise to the Dharma jewel within them. And they are our companions, our guides on the path.
다디네 당하서 동알레 하고 있으면 삼나게 딜레기변 유바도 건조스물 요래 삼제 이치제 다 숨바딜라 잡롱은에디 디레다 다디네 당하 동아 타달을 껴 건조스물 껴고래 삼비 이치데레 건조스물 껴고래 삼비 이치데레다 디 이치 타주도 쳐야 되다 데네기 이치데다 건조스물 껴고래 삼비 셈 딩기 이치베 대바디다 짬로서 디 짬로래
the mind of refuge is where one generates these two causes, where with a determination to be freed of, at the very least, a suffering rebirth in our next life, we give rise to this strong conviction, strong trust in all three jewels. This heartfelt trust in the three jewels, this is the mind of refuge.
다 건조 숨기 교불이 섬도 이치도 가르래서네 다 건조 숨기 랍지 잡아 나신 되지 람된 바나시 하나 중에 냠는 제바 있나 고된세 타르바세디 녀모바 빵베 빵바디 소수길에 끼그리에 섬거 소수 톱그리에 섬거로지 톱그리에 섬 이치디래다 니 톱선은 내가 간주게 타르바 토바로 봐 제가 타르 이치세디 되네기 건조 숨기 교불이 섬에 이치야도 건조 숨기 숨바나 징야 냠르게나 타르바세디 소수길에 톱그리에 섬 이치디로 하다 타르바 톱그리에 나면 이치면은 안에 냠르된 부차고만 톱그리에 섬베다 징이 냠는 제바나 톱그리에 섬 이치셈 딩기 이치야들래.
To understand this refuge practice, it's imperative that one is clear on the mind of refuge. So we've heard that the two causes of fear of suffering, such as in the lower realms, and recognizing that it's the three jewels that can provide us with protection from suffering. And when this faith or trust or conviction arises in a heartfelt manner, there's the three jewels that can provide protection. That is the mind of refuge. But we need to understand that a little bit more deeply. In particular, what is this? In what do we really have our trust? In what do we really place our trust and our conviction? That is in the Dharma jewel that will be generated within us, independence on the teachings of the Buddha and the assistance of the Sangha jewel. This is what the actual refuge is. It's generating realization within ourselves because it's through our endeavors, independence on the unmistaken teachings of the Buddha and the guidance of the Sangha, that we will give rise to the Dharma jewel within us. And these true cessations and paths are what provide us with suffering, protection from suffering. So this is really where our conviction and our trust is, that when we give rise to the realizations of the Dharma within us, we will be protected from suffering. So that is where we're really placing our trust and going for refuge.
안 중어 점기 점로서 기부 딩기 점로 기부 침별 점로서 해야 되는 것은 요거래 디스 다디 군노라리 거래 지상 개와 치마 나성의 동안 점레 타지 코의 동안 섬마다 정때 냐와이다 dunro레 타고도 섬에 섬다제 개와 치마 하다 미고 토고도 섬비 디점 요군에 라제 아델레 교비 니바도 건축스는 요래 섬데 이체 제바이나 디 점로 기부 중의 점기 점로서 그래 다 딜레트 하와제 코르위 동아 타달레도 저고도 제가 하다 미리 개바나 동아 여러 제가다 동아 코르위 동아 타달레 탈고도 대 탈백에 델레 타는 코르위 동아 타다 빵베 빵바디 토고도 델레 교비 니바스를 건졌으면 여러 된자다 산지고 마삼 마다제 가나 코르위 동아 타다 빵베 빵바 탈바 토고도 시잔디 대교비 델레 교비 니바스를 여러 gebne 건졌으면 여러 삼제 대 팅건졌으면 교그레 삼비 이시 제바이나 다디 기부 딩기게 딩잠기 안에 점로시 거래 나 내려야 다 기부 침버스데 랑세데 랑 동아를 들고 바나시 심전 탐제 동아를 들고 거래 지사 심전 탐제 다냐와 이다 dunro 코르위기 동아데를 들고도 지사데 내려 교비 니바디 gebne 건졌으면 요래 삼제 안에 디삼다 지사 다 심전 탐제 고외 동아 타달래 건졌으면 교불에 세비 이셰디 다디 기부 침비기 안에 점로시 거래
By now you'll be well versed in understanding that the Lama tradition, which combines all the teachings of the Buddha, is also presented in accordance with the actual sequence of trainings, in accordance with beings of varying spiritual capacities, beings of initial, intermediate, and supreme spiritual capacity. So similarly, the mind of refuge also varies in accordance with whether a practitioner is of initial, intermediate, mediatory, or supreme capacity. Therefore, there are three differing refuges. Their causes are the same, have the same two causes, but the motivation is different because the goal of the being of differing capacity is a goal that varies. The practitioner then of initial capacity, their goal is to close the door to the possibility of lower realm rebirth in their next life. They have a determination not to be born in the lower realms in their next life. But that is their goal, and that alone. So therefore, when they go for refuge, they're doing so to generate the qualities of mind, independence on the teachings of the Buddha and the guidance of the Sangha, so as to achieve a good rebirth as a human or God in their next life. That is the refuge of a practitioner of initial capacity. A practitioner of intermediate capacity has a far more ambitious objective. They have not only come to give rise to a strong wish to be freed of the suffering of lower realm rebirth in their next life, but actually they want to close the possibility of lower realm rebirth in all future lives, and even more greater than that. They've come to recognize that the upper realms, the upper migrations, these too are pervaded by suffering. And they therefore have given rise to a strong burning desire to be completely liberated from all the realms of cyclic existence, to attain freedom from suffering in its entirety. So their more profound motivation is to achieve freedom from samsara, to achieve liberation. So that is their motivation, and that is what they striving to attain protection from when they go for refuge, in order to give rise to the inner realizations that will serve to protect them from rebirth in samsara ever again. Beings, practitioners of supreme motivation, they have developed a far vaster objective. They have come to the same understandings of the practitioners of initial and intermediate capacity, but they've realized that all other ordinary beings are in the same place, the same position, in that they face the very real possibility of falling into the lower realms or remaining in the lower realms in their next lives. And wherever they are in samsara, they are bound in realms of existence, of suffering. And I, as a practitioner, am only one, but these beings are limitless. So therefore, I have the responsibility to strive for their sake. And therefore, I want to become a Buddha, just like Buddha Shakyamuni. I want to give rise to the Dharma jewel within me and develop this further so that I become a Sangha jewel, a Buddha jewel as well, for the sake of others. So this is the motivation of a being of greatest capacity. So what they're looking for is protection from remaining, of being drawn towards the peace of samsara, or the peace of liberation, and rather striving for enlightenment. So that is their goal with which they go for refuge.
Dene da di samdane de dösta duchik jangdora chedu dene niba telya ta lada mi go ba thoba samne jigmin do lada mi go ba tone dunga ba to me pa yongwa du chesa leda nyomo mo khowa le ki chinjela dunga jangya le sha da khurwe dunga tele tagu du sembe samla ta ndele tarna tarje ane khowa pangbe pangba tarbi go fa se thobu ma thone tabinu sti thogu du was chesa khurwe dunga dada dunga de kyebe niba so suye kyebe konjo sum yore kyebe konjo sum kyobure yore sembe dangbo du samta dene dunga de kyebe da kyebe konjo sum kyobure sembe ichi deje dan dene ge samno jangle de da samno de suksheli gorwa dile de da rang se de pa shenda la khapo che ngarang dewa de ba da du khol dunga la thar ko ba na shi Semjen cha zang khurwe dunga ta gu gore. Je semjen zai de rang liya din chenpo da, ge din chenpo, pe ma se ge din chenpo re. Jisa nga jibu tarbiyo go wado, semjen tamje dunga le duyende de digi mindu was. Jisa semjen tamje khurwe dunga le cho gu gu du, da dele gyobe ge, da kowa semjen tamje khurwe dunga le nga랑 khurwe dunga le gyobe nyuba de kemne konju sumlo yoba nashi da, semjen tamje khurwe dunga da le gyobe nyuba de sumlo yosa kemne konju sumlo yore samje, 이시 제. 데네 대인자당에 샘제 탐지기도 나 산지 고방 마tum데 탑민도 제사 산지 고방 톱구도 대인장에 델레 교비게다 고외 동아 타다 교비 뉴바디 네 샘제 탐제 산지 고방 네 녀모 바샤던 제발에 교비 뉴바디 술려 산지려 제사 샘제 탐제 녀모 동아 녀모가 사베 바타지 바샤던 제발에 때문에 건축을 교그리 사비 이지지에 대한 저기 태바침 백점도 제가 두두 삼다야지 땅고를 와다 디제반에다 태바침 백 대시 장뒤값에 기부 중이 투모회 기부 중원나 투모회 점도디야지 기부 중다 투모회 점도디야지 다 기부 침비기 점도디 지호래 원도 제반의 숨과 자르고.
So how should we go for refuge then? So we should train ourselves then in the following way, in accordance with the practitioners of the three varying capacities, starting with the one, building it to the second, and then to the third. So we first start by meditating in the way a practitioner of initial capacity starts, reflecting on this invaluable opportunity we've achieved with this precious human rebirth, reminding ourselves, though, of its impermanence, and that at the time of death, we are still in a position where a lower realm rebirth is a very real possibility. And who has the ability then to guide us to cultivate the causes within our own continuum that will provide protection from such a rebirth in our next life? It's the three jewels. So this then is the refuge that's in accordance with a practitioner of initial capacity. But then we build on that, and we now go for regenerate the motivation of a practitioner of intermediate capacity, reflecting that, but even if I manage to close the door to lower realm rebirth in my next life, in my future life I'll be in the same position, and this will continue until I attain freedom from cyclic existence in its entirety. And moreover, every rebirth as a human or even as a god, one still suffers. One still suffers continuously. And here one reflects on this blazing prison of samsara, where one suffering is replaced or followed by another and another, giving rise to a strong wish for freedom, a lasting freedom, a complete freedom, where one no longer suffers at all. Just like before, who has the ability to guide us, to develop the realizations in our own continuum that will lead to such freedom? It's the three jewels. Here we have generated the motivation of trust in the three jewels that's in accordance with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. Then we take it further, and we now generate the refuge that is unique to a practitioner of supreme capacity, reflecting that what we have come to recognize about the suffering realms of cyclic existence, as well as the possibility for lower realm rebirth in the very next rebirth, is something that all sentient beings face. And we have to do something about them. They are suffering too, just like we are, but they are lost in the darkness of ignorance. And these beings aren't strangers to me. They may be in this life, but from beginning lifetimes, they've shown me such tremendous kindness. Now that I've met the Dharma, I have a responsibility to help them. I therefore must become a Buddha for their sake, so that I can guide them to generate refuge and independence on that, become Buddhas themselves. And who has the ability to guide me to generate the actual Dharma jewel within my own continuum? Who has the ability to guide me so that I can abandon my afflictions completely together with their seeds? That's the three jewels. And here we generate confidence, trust in the three jewels, that they can guide us to the attainment of our own enlightenment. So this is how we go for refuge, in accordance with the being of initial capacity, in accordance with the being of intermediate capacity, and by doing so, we then go for refuge in the unique way of a being of supreme capacity.
Dan jamru jeba zamgi anda kore dungale tartugu rebesin tartugu omar karsinda denegi ichi chene ichi jeba enza da ichi chene karchi oresene degi labja nyamnen jege nyamnen didi jegore labja majab shebadi de ya lamden jeba de ya nyamnen jegore ese di labja nyamba mebaji ese 제가 jamruge labja da dunga kore dungale tarayada tar바다 탐지기마 투에 탑람 냠는 디제고래 써야지 송샤바 딜이야 랍제딩아 저기 수 냠는지 소수기 셈을 봐자지 소수기 퇴바지 디도나 야네는 쌈다 곰제 오수 냠는지 고래 해지래 디에 랍자 냠밤에 버지 했지.
This meditation on refuge we need to do repeatedly over a sustained period, because this is how we make it stable and firm within us. As it says in the next line, therefore, make firm the practice of going for refuge. The meditation then I've just outlined, this you need to engage in repeatedly. But merely having faith, no matter how stable it is insufficient to achieve the desired goal, to generate the Dharma jewel within ourselves. One then needs to go further, as presented in the next line, and ensure that the precepts do not degenerate. This term precepts we can also take as trainings. The trainings then we can understand here as the teachings that we are given. We need to hear them again and again, always continuing to reflect and meditate on them. And in this way, the advice that's given to us in teachings will cultivate within us. That is how one actually goes for refuge. Having generated faith, then enacting the teachings. In other words, repeatedly hearing teachings whenever that opportunity comes, reflecting on them continuously, meditating them on continuously, training as one is taught. So this is how we understand the fourth line. So we can retranslate this as and ensure that the trainings do not degenerate. In other words, repeatedly hearing, reflecting, and meditating.
지난달 점주기 랍자라 랍고리에서 점주 랍자 랍라야데 가레스네 단 점주기 랍자 소디 당한데 디르와 당한지기 진배 냠내자다 추림 냠내자 수배 냠내 존재 냠내자 되는 삼단 셰라비 냠내자데 파신주기 가서 진소주기 냠내자들이 지나 안델이야 안지가 맞은 예군원이야 나 코와라 탈두가 삼방에 좀 거면 안에 잠니지 거면 저다 잠주기 랍자 세고로 봐 지사 내게 잡주 맞아 건축 접거리했으면 건축수는 접수죠 낸 접주디기 랍징이 랍자디 냠는 지긴스네 켈렘바이나 다 냠는 살아 찍지 안데 마샤샤바이나 안데스제네 샤샤바는 냠루 그래지 지사 냐네야도 무디네 제바네 거 냠바메바 마냐바 니 야네 무디 냠는 제바네 야야야 주고래서 냠바메바 지에서 디스고래 지사 내게 냠바메바 제할이야 셈슈로다 뉴바체 요야 가리군 그랬는데 대리야 대양 까나 레레 레삼네서 지사 까나 레레스네 레 까르스네 까비 레 개와시고 나고스네 미개와시고 지사 까비 레 개와 제바이나 게위 제보디게 아니가 줄이야 깨야야 nga zu pene semla shide yoya soso digi yoya ane soso gu dunga nyomo ba dunga se tuya se ya ane kewa chimaina kewa le ma hada mi ko wa top tuya rang le digi yoya semla an nyamle ye rimba de ya gone pe 제가 안디 라레 냠네 제바데 샹레야 마 신네 샹레야 파도체 샹인다 디기 주표에 두에게 되네기 약보도 세데 제산 기위 자와 냠는 제바이나 안다 karbu kewa le karasena nga zu lungas nyeju tu tsurum sombaina sosola digi mishala digi yong tu gore an digi kenjine kewa chimaina nga zu lada migo wa top tu gore jiza da nga zu gi karbu ke le an jimbe nyamna chebaina rang digi shala digi tu tu ya da an dina shinda soba da zunju da samdan da digi dinge zen gomche dina kombain jiza tarba da tamje ki me to lam ta nya du zin lam top tu gore asbigi 데니게 깔비게 레게 냠는 집에 제부디게 도 삼다 데네 나베레시도 디바사바이나 가려서 나베레 디바체바이나 가려서 디기다 나저 디바세데 세델리아 콘트로다 되차다 뇽몽베케바이나 랑라 마키바 마이 세델리나 마키바 강아 디 제부디게 깨워치마나 나소게 나소에 누가 빠토메바 용고야 데네 나소게스네 데네 대와 gewe jubiya ko ko maraba ane gidi na ngaso kewa deni tua sabegi na chisa karbi ge gewe lege jawa ge jebu digi deni yongdu wa sabegi samta diba jeba ne jebu deni yongdu wa sabegi deni gi du samta chene deni kana le de la samne so du sten sam tang go rese nang dima nyamdu lapshan riu de lang do tsujin ju la ra le so si de jisan de ne samda ne lang si de jisan kiwi jawa di da ang ju gi jimba da tsujim la so pe kiwi jawa nyamne je kan ne sina chasa pe nyamsu le de res lang go res nyamsu le de res pe ya go che sa so chin nyamsu ling go zun ju chin nyamsu ling ga res dor se di da digbi ge le ga jawa digba ka re sina chenpo di na chungju ina ka re sina 마 두베 깨마줘야지 바까지 매버서 가디 돌고야지 마스 깨침버려. 제가 내랑도 수신도 시작을 했습니다. 산지기 마 냠는지 제 건조스미기다 마 랍자 냠는 숨바 나신 장아지고 후다바다 제고를 되네 제바나 델라라려바 되네 후다바다 냠는 제바 있나 아니 나중에 기회 잡아야 누구야야 철철 줘야다. 개와치 말하다 미고 뭐 토투야. 아니 기회 잡아 잠니지 야 철을 시안에 판버주되 사타바 탐지기고 뭐 토투바디 용고리에스. 제산 디 용하데 안주기 되니게 삼다지 냠는 제발라 라리고 냠는 거지 야가지나 당아지 타바 탐지기고 뭐도야 다 녀르녀 주고 그래서 제산디 야보 중마도나 아니 망할 손마 아니 계획이 자르고 그래서 숨거다.
And the last line of verse 15, and ensure that the trainings do not degenerate. So the trainings are what has already been briefly mentioned. Training in ethical restraint, in generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, as well as concentration and wisdom. And moreover, definite emergence, love, compassion. So all of these are included within the trainings. These one needs to train in repeatedly over a sustained period, not sporadically, not whenever the mood takes oneself, but rather repeatedly over a sustained period, because that is what will lead to transformation. If not, then whatever perhaps inspiration arises within one when hearing a teaching such as this, if one doesn't build on that through meditating and reflecting on what's been taught here, that inspiration will degenerate. Or if one does reflect and does for a period of time, there will be mental development. But if one then leaves it and gets overwhelmed by worldly activities, what one has achieved will degenerate. So therefore, one needs to take whatever inspiration one has, whatever knowledge one has, put that into practice, reflect on it, and live by it. In addition, the text continues, and in addition, you need to contemplate well wholesome and unwholesome karma. So this, of course, then refers to virtuous and non-virtuous karma. Virtuous karma is the causes that lead to the results of a peaceful mind, leads to the results of good rebirth, leads to the mind not only that is a happiness for oneself, but leads to us having an impact on the lives of others that brings happiness to them too. So these virtuous or wholesome, this wholesome karma, these wholesome activities to reflect on, for example, ethical restraint, restraining our mind and thereby our body and speech. In this way, we bring benefit to others. Creating virtue, bringing benefit to ourselves and others. Moreover, studying and reflecting on generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and so forth, all of which bring benefit to ourselves and through our spiritual development, benefits to others. And that benefit is experienced in this life. But moreover, those causes lead to our spiritual progression rapidly expanding and the attainment of liberation and enlightenment coming ever closer. And what is to be turned away from is the unwholesome karma. So this is whenever afflictions arise, the mere arisal, and in particular, the acting out on them, brings about suffering to ourselves and others, brings about harm to ourselves and others in this and future lives. This is what we need to abandon, unwholesome karma. The next line, rely on practicing unmistakenly what should be adopted and abandoned. What should be adopted are these causes that have already been mentioned. Causes such as ethical restraint, generosity, patience, and so forth. All of these. All, whenever we have the opportunity to engage in virtue, we should do so. This is adopting virtue and doing it so in an unmistakable manner. Not just sporadically, not just the great things, but small things too. And similarly, all that should be abandoned is even slight afflictions, slight afflicted activities should be abandoned. Not thinking, oh, this doesn't really matter. It will have a small result. It's okay. And making excuses like that. We have a great goal as our objective. And to achieve this state of perfection, every opportunity to accumulate virtue should be done. At all times, keep the mind on virtue and act under it, no matter how small the opportunity. Likewise, when afflictions arise, don't make excuses for it. At all times, turn away from those afflictions. And in this way, we will make great effort and transform ourselves and progress rapidly to the achievement of liberation and enlightenment.
아니네. 내올이야 제름 측에 나중에 양념는 디다르세 타르되다냐 대신 장살로 시대 지상에 이네 냐마 두스네 아니 두스 캡소 간베네 고와당 어스 동알이야 괜다 델레 아니 괜도 델레 규비니 바 콘조스노 요레 선비게 이시제 디네 델레 요바자다 고요 동아 셈제 탐쟁한서 차상 고요 동아 유규 련요모 바샤다 제발 점녀 콘조스노 교그레 선비 이치 템보체 아니 대야 템보체 되네 아니 캡지 랍잘이야 수신도 라바인 랍제도 신냠는 제바인스 난 결혼서이네 다 고요 동아 타달래 탈고고 결혼서래 탈야기 되어요래 지상 되어요 바인자 결혼서이네 두스치네 안 냠는 제고래 해서지 어두스 냠르드네 제고래 드네 냠르드네 지네 냠르 랍샬라 야 냠는 두스치 홀다 받아 지네 랍고래 해서지 너도 숨고래.
The verse concludes with Geshe Rinpoche once again exhorting us. I, a yogi, have practiced in this manner. You, who aspire for liberation, should do likewise. So Geshe Rinpoche too trained exactly as has been presented here. He saw the grave danger of falling into the low realms and generated faith that through cultivating the Dharma within himself, he would be able to close that door. Moreover, through reflecting on the faults of cyclic existence in its entirety, he saw that there's no rebirth worthy of striving for in itself. There's no experience in samsara worthy of longing for. All that one should strive for is freedom, an end to suffering. And here he saw that the only way to achieve this is through cultivating the Dharma within himself, cultivating the Dharma jewel within himself, independence on relying on the Buddha jewel and the Sangha jewel. And moreover, he saw that all other beings are trapped in the realms of samsara, in this prison of samsara. And they are desperate to be guided in how to gain freedom, how to train their own minds. And therefore he made the commitment to become a Buddha for their sake. And who has the ability to guide him in an unmistaken manner to become a Buddha? It's the three jewels. The three jewels can guide him in the achievement of all the minds of enlightenment within himself. So therefore, this is how he himself trained, and is saying to us, please, train as presented here. This is what I did. Please do likewise.
나데네 마 가르스고라스네 당한테 태바침비기 최 냠낸 야고 제발라 엔팅 개발진 류딩 개발진 된주기 밀리를 뭐 체사디 류딩 개발지 토보고 디마토바 있나 아니 아주 냠내 야고 지투 말에서 디마 디숨고래.
The text continues that in order to train well in the Mahayana Dharma, one needs a exalted or a perfect basis, a precious human rebirth.
직들라 람촌 주블라 친이 참위된 만예 바도 사취 미용외 디 마사 메비규라 랍 고숨 디두 고숨 디둥 디메 바바디 라바 레룹 정화 네체베 균도 뜻이 참을 땜바지 지전라면님는 대달제 가서 나중에 양념는 대달제 탈도다 같이 양사로 세제 어직디든 마송으로.
In verses 17 and 18, until you have obtained a form with characteristics complete, you will fail to make great strides in pursuing the supreme path. So train in those causes that are still incomplete. Since your 3 doors are so sullied with non-virtuous karma and downfalls, it is especially vital to purify their karmic defilements. Through relying continuously on the complete and indispensable 4 opponent powers, I, a yogi, have practiced in this manner. You who aspire for liberation should do likewise.
다 람초 세도 람초 세된 건데 람냠린 지에네 람초도 교바 태바침비 람긴냠리 세 태바침비 람긴냠레 산지고 뭐 투비 쳐도 람냠레 제기다 당한 저기 자주심 유군데 라네 자주심다 아니 파신 두게 냠레 책으로 어디에 람초 세요 제가 다 람초 주베 생이 참비 댄스데 당한 좀 제대로 되신 셰바나진 저기 다 다데딘 된주기 밀류를 뭐지 톱되어래 제가 다데 될량 저기 냠는 제제 태바침비 최 냠는 제제 줍제 냠는 귤에 게마도 보이나 다 뭐바나 냠는 제기 댄지고 냠는 제고로 무대 냠는 제고로 제가 남기 초 주역이 태바침비 최 냠는 제발라 댄생이 상와지 고래마도 댄 류딘 야보지 매바나 태바침비 최 냠는 야보지 두 말해서 남조 주블라 생이 참이 댄 만예 봐도 사치 미용외세도 생이 상화데 매나 냠는 뉴버 텀바지 하고 용 말 뉴버 침고 용 말 뉴버 턴두고 말해지래 제사변에 뉴로이나 아니 뉴로로시티나 안 디텔라 냠네 하고 지도 말 먼저 미로시네 아니 레가 변에 원부 마송와 암조하고 마고와 아니 미기하고 마송와 아니 지기 셈타다 매바이나 되는 냠네 제반에 하고 지도 말 제사 안 되려 아직 먼저 미원부 차상 차대바이나 최유기인 공부 갈래하고 쉬우에나 양지기람 냠네 지알고 거기 야보라고 막았으네 그 최유기인도 달래가려고 와되네 갈래자고 안 되네게 안 되네 현자 당한 줄에 캐바침이 최 냠네지기 때 약쇼 되가선 내주기 밀리지 못지래 자사 내내기 때 야보지 많이 봐도 맞을래 태바침이 최 냠네 야보지 뉴버 템바지 지투 말 됐어요 제바이나 뉴버 템을 율에 끼투에 야보지 용발했어요 람조 주블라 생이 참여된 많이 봐도 사치 미용외에서도 태바침이 최 냠네 제발라 된 생이 상황 밀리기는 뭐지 톡고 그래서 디마토바이나 댄샤다이 밀리는 뭐지 마토바이나 댄샤다이 된 태바침이 최 냠네 제 뱀마시 깔려 하고 나송을 때라다 신도네 깔려 하고 디나신 데니야 나사수도 숨메라 삼다웨네 깔려 하고 안디네 데벨 할레 사야고 태바침이 최 냠네 제 여바이네 데솔이야 아직 나게 냠네 제야 돼 태바침이 깨림나 조름이 냠네 제라게 말 제사 태바침이 최 동화 차상 냠는 집에 된 생이 상화돼 가서는 밀리지 못치레스 제사 디토바 토고 그래서 직 당군이디
Until you have obtained a form with characteristics complete, you will fail to make great strides in pursuing the supreme path. The supreme path here then refers to the path of the Mahayana Dharma, which is achieved when one generates bodhicitta in one's continuum. And with bodhicitta cultivated, then one engages in the 6 perfections. This is the supreme path because it leads to the supreme result, that of enlightenment, the goal of those who want to be of supreme benefit to others. In order to achieve such a supreme path, one needs to have their suitable basis. And the very best of basis is that of a precious human rebirth, because a human rebirth that is precious is one that is marked by all characteristics complete. And that we see in the first line, that in order to practice the supreme path, one needs to have a rebirth with characteristics complete. And this is because if one achieves a human rebirth, but one doesn't have all the required characteristics, one's spiritual progression may be completely prevented, but if not, severely impeded. For example, if one has a severe mental impediment or a sense impediment, such as not being able to see or hear and so forth, this impedes one's spiritual development. Or if one lacks an interest in the Buddha Dharma, one may have a human rebirth, but not very interested in spiritual development. Or if one has an interest in spiritual development, but doesn't have hasn't created the causes to meet a teacher, one will struggle to develop. Or if one does meet a teacher, but isn't very interested in receiving teachings, or in training in those teachings, training with vigor in those teachings, these all serve as impediments to one's spiritual development, and means that one may have a human rebirth, but it's not a precious human rebirth. It's not a rebirth with characteristics complete. Moreover, if one doesn't achieve a rebirth but is born into the suffering lower realms, the intensity of one's suffering means that one will not be able to apply oneself to virtue. Or if one achieves rebirth in the upper realms, as one of the God realms, one will be so overwhelmed by the pleasures of these realms, one will not turn one's mind towards the Dharma. Well, it will be very difficult to turn one's mind towards the Dharma. But even if one does, one doesn't have the physical basis that is required, a human rebirth, to practice Tantra, and therefore enlightenment is not possible. So therefore, one has to achieve a rebirth with characteristics complete, with all the qualities, a human rebirth with all the required characteristics required in order to achieve the supreme path and progress on the supreme path. This is the meaning of these first two lines.
dine zangado tekwa chimbi chue nyamlen jege da chue nyamlen jege tin yaksho da denjuge milu machidres dine inza an de masang mebe gyula lapsidu chisada dada ngazo denju milu mach topyor dada ngazo mahon bana an jewa chimai mahon bana na denjuge milu mach topje tin tel yangazo ge nyamlen jege gogor was chisa mahon bana denjuge milu mach topgor chisa di topye ge dondala 마음바나 된지 밀르르미 토비에 윤규 마상와메바 라고고레 다데나가조이 장고레 규디 싸고레서 규레 랍세데 규디파 장 랍지 냠렌체 규 싸고레서 디 마사메비 규라 랍세데
Recognizing then the great importance of utilizing this incomparable opportunity we have in the most meaningful of ways, we come to the next line. Train in those causes that are still incomplete. Knowing the causes then for precious human rebirth, train in those which are still not fully developed within oneself, because this ensures that we will continue to receive good rebirth upon good rebirth, and thereby have the ideal basis to cultivate the supreme path within us, to be able to make great strides in pursuing the supreme path, in generating the supreme path within our own continuum. So here we are exhorted to train in the causes that are still incomplete.
제자당 안주변에 대주 밀려를 맞 토비 규대라 가라요라 세나가서 다 누가스 예주도 추름 소야 되래 추름 소야 지그래 근데 진배 냠는 지야래 쇠배 냠는 지야래 쫀리 냠는 지야래 되네야 몰람 따야래 몰람 디마 참자 몰람 따야 안 디가라 양도 중다다 띵이지 같이 가서 세딜에 희니에 좀 마토베네 지 띵이지 공부하게 두 배수 제가 있나 안 마오바나 chik ten de la ya, yang chik sem zeche de jine de zhuye le la yung wa. Donda la gang zui, tsurim so ya, suibe nyamle jia, zunri nyamle jia, jimbe nyamle jia, zunri bene jimba, tsurim suiba zunri, malam tabia de, di yeche mo cha kwa, di malam. Chesa, di na de tsurim jikbu song che, jimba dang, suiba la suibe nyamle ma je bay na, tenju milu rinpoche top ne, tenju milu rinpoche top ma re che re. Chesa da, jimba dang tsurim suiba la soba, zunri la soba nyamle che bay na, da nga zu malam yakbo jab me na, milu yakbo top bay na, chue shigen kiwe shiin che ya dang, chue nyamsi liya kwa raya li kako che, chesa malam yakbo jab re. Chesa dine ki gyuchasa da nga zu ki 마상와 매바 냠는 지 오래세 디스고다 차상 차상 랍고 그래 마도 찍니 랍 내는 잔다 냠 맞이나 대주밀 주시 톡톡 말해 제인자다 마상와 매바 냠는 제대 가래 랍나 아 저기 다 다데 류가 있으니 예제도 수림 송어도 다 그런 밀이 타야게 규르차 수림 송 얘네 먼저 진비 냠는 제도 개와치면 밀이 되게 된del이야 튕겨야고요 튕겨게 강한 맞춰야 내随便냠는 지도 원보 상화 차야 전주의 냠내 지에도 안 될이야 안 최게 냠내 지알이야 최를 된바 düny를 된바 여바다 안두시야 안에 몰람 잡여도 다 개와치마 개와치베 개위 신제 개위 신나 채 안에 최제야 고고 약보라와 쇼스비 안두스 몰람 잡여도 안에 개위 신나 상이 된바다 제야다 개위 신나 채야다 안 되네기 최고합라야 돼 차고 그래서 디수 차상 냠내 제고고래 해서 마상메 베귤라 랍시 디스고
This is an important line here. Train in those causes that are still incomplete, because even if one does recognize the need to attain a good rebirth and not fall into our lower realms, and the need to spiritually train from life to life, if one doesn't train in all the causes for precious human rebirth, whilst one may achieve a good rebirth as, say, a human, it will not be a precious human rebirth. So it's imperative one trains well in all the causes. And there are several causes, and all of them need to be trained in order to have a rebirth with characteristics complete. So to achieve a human rebirth or a God rebirth, in other words, a rebirth in an upper realm and not in the suffering lower realms, the indispensable cause is the ethical restraint, where we restrain our body, speech, and mind from becoming under the influence of the afflictions. This is indispensable. But if one trains in this cause alone, one will not achieve a precious human rebirth. One will achieve a rebirth as a human or a God, but not a precious human rebirth, because the causes are incomplete. One also needs to train in generosity, because generosity ensures or creates the causes that one will have all favorable circumstances, abundance, especially of material, but not only material conditions that are required, so that one is not overwhelmed by poverty, and thereby that serves as an impediment to one's spiritual progression, so that one has the required conditions in order to have the freedom, the leisure to engage in spiritual development in our future lives. But if one only trains in ethical restraint and cultivates the mind of generosity, one is still not training in complete causes. One also needs to develop patience, the mind that stays undisturbed in this face of adversity. When one's cultivated ethical restraint and generosity well, ethical restraint, the commitment not to harm, generosity, the wish to benefit, they serve as an ideal basis to practice patience, the mind that stays undisturbed in the face of adversity. And this then creates the causes that in our future lives not only do we have harmonious relationships with others, but that our sense powers are not harmed, and our mental capacity is not impeded. But these three practices too, ethical restraint, generosity, and patience, if one solely practices these, still complete causes are not accumulated. One also needs to train in joyous perseverance, which is the mind that takes delight in virtue. So this is where one takes great joy in virtue, whether it's receiving teachings, reflecting on those teachings, being of benefit to others, acting under the influence of these teachings, joy in turning away from the afflictions, and joy in generating virtuous minds. This is an imperative course because it ensures that in our future lives, we'll have an inclination, a personality that is virtuous, that is ethical, that is loving and kind, that is generous and patient. This is important. It will mean we inclined towards the Dharma. We will have a liking for the Dharma. These are the 4 key causes, and they need to be rounded off with the 5th, that of prayer. And prayer is where we generate this strong and heartfelt aspiration, having recognized already the great importance of the Mahayana Dharma and a spiritual teacher. We pray that in life after life, we always meet our spiritual teacher, meet them at a young age, recognize them as spiritual teachers, and have the great determination to receive teachings from them and training those teachings consistently throughout our life. This is indispensable so that in our future lives, with all these other causes accumulated, we have a precious human rebirth, and we seek out and meet with ease our teacher and train under their care. This is imperative. So these are the 4 key causes plus prayer that are required. In addition, if one trains in concentration at these various points, and when we're training in ethical restraint, we do so in an undistracted way, likewise with generosity, patience, joy, perseverance. This means not only will we be creating more powerful merit now, because our mind's not so distracted, in the future, we'll be able to generate single-pointed concentration that much easier. This is how to train in cultivating the complete causes and ensuring that we have characteristics complete.
다 마찬가지로 배길라비아디 규리대체 인디가랑 하는 저기 집변에 딩이제 다 신에다 동요도비 셰랍 86세도 신에다 딩이 셰랍스를 하던 식으로 이내당 하는 세들이야 딩이제 신에 마토바다 동요도비 셰랍 맞게바이네 당하는 저기 곰접 딩에서 셈세지도 내야려 나 저기 장도를 저 곰접 안디나신다 지게 나 저기 메타바세다 겐진 제유고 제바치야다 안에 다음에 보고 삼다 제바치바 디니기 제바이나 안 제와치마 겐사다 주기 밀르르 톱되디 덴텔이야 안에 셰랍티기 리바티기 상부 리보 뉴와 안에 셈 남에 뉴와 게위철이야 좀 셰용고로 제가 딩이지 셈 템바용 두고로와 제가 대수인자 당아주기 주대수에 장고에 납고야 최고로.
And the 4 indispensable causes for precious human rebirth: ethical restraint, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, as well as prayer. To enhance it further, it's good to train in concentration, as well as wisdom, because it's wisdom that is required to achieve liberation and enlightenment. And this specifically means developing the wisdom realizing emptiness. When we think of it in the context of developing calm abiding, which is a single-pointed concentration, following that, one develops meditative insight, where one can, with an undistracted mind, analyze phenomena, analyze reality. If we can achieve that in this life, wow, that's a life lived well. But if we can't, we accumulate the causes so we do in our future lives. How so? So in addition to the 4 key causes plus prayer, as well as concentration, we should then reflect on impermanence, dependence arising, selflessness of persons. Because even if we don't come to realize these in this life, through engaging in meditations on topics such as these, impermanence, dependence arising, and selflessness of persons, we create the causes to have great intelligence in our future lives, a sharp, reasoning, analytical intelligence that will serve us to achieve the wisdom realizing emptiness. So this is an additional training that would be fantastic to cultivate in this life.
안온달라 마상메비 귤랍시디 인다 귤랍야디 당한주 진소 주위냠는 제대로 레도하다 디텔라야체 난 데네게 라요 당하는 저기 난 디월이야 gosum dirip babe kasa gosum dime babadi labar lerip jongwa ne chewe ane 균도 dobshi changwe tenpar cha sede da nga zu nyamlen che de setele da nga zu nyamlen che de kabla da dirip jaya di ma be mas ki chin bores je sang nga zu kewa nga ma dikpa mangpo sa jang nga zu gyula dikpa mangpo yores je sang kewa nga ma na sa da de sa go je sang dikpa mangpo sa je sang dirip di ba janggu bores je sang di bene lunga yisumyo ko ne sa shi bi dikpa mangpo 지산 디고 숙침보에는 니기엔지 나간절이야 곰 냠내 제야야 또고 이야기 돼야 냠내 제야 깔려하고 용고레스 지산 대 디립 장고에 빼 마스키 침보려야지 고숨기 디립 고숨 디둥 바비게 바바디 근데 하버 리립 자와 레기 디바 자데 내심보 빼도 계심보 쇼레스 지산다디 가네 장고그레라나 대님부터 시대네 장고그레지 샤도 디보 샤고레스 그러다 지산 아주 류가 있으면 거네 개왕아마 망보는 류가 있으면 디바 망보 사자요 체델에네 아주 류가 있으면 디바 망보 사요 제가 데니기 디바데 마샤바 있나 디기 슈킹이 아주게 아니 계절게 냠는 제발라 바시 제제 야고 용투고 말에 제가 디파 샤고레스 배 샤고데 배 계침부레 내침부레스 계침부시고레스 나는 그는 샤고레스네 님보 뜻이 참여되는 샤고레스 윤도 뜻인 때문에 창외 땜바라 자스니 보도시 때네 아니 마샤고 레지레
What's been presented here then is what the causes are that need to be accumulated in order to achieve one's desired result. To achieve the perfect, precious human rebirth, one needs to cut with characteristics complete. One needs to cultivate complete causes. To have a complete result comes about only in dependence on cultivating complete causes. So one has to accumulate virtue. But the reality is, in our accumulation of virtue, we experience many obstacles, many impediments to our spiritual development. And this is because of the non-virtue that abides on our continuum, the negativities that we have accumulated in this and previous lifetimes. And this is then referred to in the fourth line. Since your three doors are so sullied with non-virtuous karma and downfalls, it is especially vital to purify their karmic defilements. So here we are being told that we have to accumulate virtue in the way that has been outlined from ethical restraint onwards. But in conjunction with this, together with this, we need to purify this vast store of negative karma that we have on our continuum, that we have accumulated thus far and have over previous lives. This is imperative because this negative karma impedes our spiritual development. So these two we need to do together, accumulate virtue and purify negativities. So this is important to understand. Hence it says here, it is especially vital to purify negative karma. And how to do so? This is in the second line in verse 18. Through relying continuously on the complete and indispensable four opponent powers. So the four opponent powers, it's through relying on these that we are able to purify the negative karma that we have accumulated in both this and past lives. And in this way, reduce and eventually eliminate these hindrances to our spiritual development. So these two need to be done together. Accumulation of virtue and purification of non-virtue.
Nyamanga jugi dipachesha de noru junsha di mindu sambege gyobaje samdaya de samdaya jigre dene nyambo jigre ane dene niba de la har samdosne ta maomba na dene ge zawgne jigme sambege samdaya de di jigre ta nyaba la midobe tofsya de 다 띵 유튜브 때 가르친 띵 유튜브 때 저기 동아샤바게 라숨주 송아 띵다 델이야 띵제 아니 델이야 다 동아티 교바 바 메디네기 동아 냐마티버제 노르 주샤 산디리 마 치만에 자오기는 지금에 삼제 다 디링에 디바디 파샤기 삼제 안야 띵이 또때 네 다디 동아샤발라 숨주 송아체 다 디네기 니베 또때 가르쳐서는 당한 동아시벨 라숨주 송이게 차연주의제 안 취파돼 당아서 차푸바이나 디아바제지로 제시 안 차푸바이나 니기 되당 안 디아바제야당 니니게 차푸에 개와디다 님도 없어 차고래 제가 니니게 토네가 저기 디바샤 님도 쉬고네 디바샤다 되는시 제가 님도 쉬고네 디바샤다라다 망부 연구로 와다 또 간스팀바 망부 연구를 다대가 비슷한 좀 제바나 안 되는 샤바나다 님도 쉬고네 샤다로 차고 되는 차고
through relying continuously on the complete and indispensable four opponent powers. Here, the text refers to the technique, the method for purifying our accumulation of non-virtuous karma, and it is to rely on the four opponent powers. So, what are these and how to rely on them? So first, one reflects on the negative karma that one has accumulated, thinking about generating great regret for what has been done, knowing that we have harmed ourselves and others. And from this, only suffering comes. And like this, we generate strong regret. And this is the crucial first step. Dependence on the strength of our regret comes about the strength of the following three opponent powers. So the first is regret, regretting our past negative misdeeds. And having generated regret and dependence on that comes the second antidote, that of the promise of, or the restraint, I will not engage in such negativities again. I close myself to that kind of behavior, repeating that kind of behavior again, of thinking that way, of acting in that way. Here we make the promise to turn away from that harmful behavior. That's the second. The first is regret, the second is promise or restraint. The third is the antidote of basis. And here, having generated regret and made the promise, we turn our mind to the objects of refuge, and as well as to the objects of refuge, and saying to them, this behavior, this non-virtuous behavior, was contrary to my commitments to training in accordance with your teachings. I will refrain from that. Moreover, it was contrary to my commitments to striving to become a bodhisattva for the sake of others. And therefore, for the second reason too, I will restrain myself from such behavior. So that's the third opponent power, that of the basis. And the fourth then is the antidotal power, where one accumulates virtue or good merit, good karma in any way. And that serves as the antidotal power to purify the non-virtue accumulated. One technique is the 35, engage in the practice of the 35 confession Buddhas, where one recites their names, and this is often done with doing prostrations. So here one engages in the fourth antidotal power, and one does so with regret having been generated, the commitment not to engage in such virtue again, as well as refuge and bodhicitta. And one engages then in the antidotal power, such as the recitation of the names of the 35 confession Buddhas, and probably in conjunction with prostrations too. And Jerim Piché concludes in the same way he has before. This is how I trained. You who long for liberation should do the same. Practice like me, emulate me, you will achieve the same result. Because I emulated all the Buddhas before and achieved that result. I, a yogi who practice in this manner, you who aspire for liberation should do likewise.
On those jere, Dine zada nganzu kunlo dilya, zawi kunlo tangpo na, jige dambashakya tuba tang, ane jige jerimcha lasobe, koranzuki kusung tuyu yunden jen, shibyo kwane, ane ya deba chea tang. Da koranzuki nashin jine ngeya, ane sanji kupanchi top kukudu mato tabi towar jigin samche, jizan di tobi tablam nyamne jigin sambi kya dunba kiya tang, dine samta. Dine ane nganzuki da, lamrim nyamne jigin samyadu, da nyamne tangpo kana chiwarasina, gewe shinyan soso rangi da gewe shinyan digi ba kusung tusu yunden jenje dela deba zechidu che da lami getin digi pa jenje an lamalya gyun tongwe samma gyune gechugu me sabi lami kusung tu yunden jenya da du shene samda gomya dire dene nipa dila da diringi diensa denjugi milyu ribachi topda yu gogab dine yoba dingi nyamne chi machinda tab milu sheza da dingi dade diring nyamne majeba ina ane maje machine 되바 이나 안에 냠는지야 고가 말아와치네 시로바이나 배 마서 경라사래 디링 냠는지 지지기 선비게 당에 된주기 밀리르미지 자침보 디링 톱고 토드 배 마서 야고슈이 두아 선비게 랑기 다 겨왕아마이 미세디기 단주기 밀리르 토에 규야고서 배야고 제샤 선비기 겨왕아마들이야 그런 계사도를 가하고 디링이 루된 야고 톱디 배 야고야 다 된델 양이 냠는지 야고슈이 선비게 다닝보 야 산지고 방 특비 치르도 냠내 야고 지인 선비게 삼다야다 안에 도스치네 삼다 나데 숨바딜레도 당아 줄이야 안 당아 줄 동아 다지가 라다 신 참아 코유 동아 세야데 나송의 동아래 녀위 동아 이다의 동아 당아 지미 사담비 동아 가와이나 동아 게라지냐 레다 녀모모 코와레 기친칠레 동아 게라시리 동아들레 탈고도 다랑지 보면 신심자 탐제 동아 탈고도 선배 삼다 되는지 신심자라 잠바다 제와콤 니제콤 제사 심자 탐제 산조콤 토우도 딜레 껴비 니바데 술여서 산지 요래 겹네 건주스무 요래 선배게 이시체 제사다 겹네 건주스무 껴버리 선배 이시체야다 나 이지제네 다 겹네 건주스무기 랍제들이야 아니 람든제셰베 탈바 탐지킴베 토야게 람든제레 바들랑이 랍기 삼체 안 규차사 마상오메 랍기 셈비게다 데니게 잠들 랍야게 되바 도스치네 삼마시다 안디제라 다 디링이 냠네 제베 마세 야구이 다 이네 무투시앙에 산지 유고바 토바 태바치메 취 냠네 제발라 디링 나신 류딘 캬바제 마토바이나 마옹바나 마토바이나 디닝 냠네 제래 갈래카고 제사레 디인상이 무투제 태바치메 산지 유고바 마토바도 태바치메 취 냠네 제래 dien상보 단주 밀루로 제 토바지기사 지산 디토베 유다 진바 추전서와 전제 삼대 샤라티기 냠네지 세베게 냠네제다 노스네 삼다제 수수기 되네기 냠네 강도도 냠네지야 나데네 다겨왕아마네야 디바다 다데 디바사셰비길레 룽아이스뉴겐 디바유 가레 요바티 차상이다 디리 냠보도 슈코네 샤기 제상이 되네기 노트 디바체바베 노트 중샤 셈비기 겨바기에 데네 안 마음바나 싸워있는 지금에 셈비게다 domsum제 되네 아 저기다 다 냠보도 시대야디다 아 저기 다 도시 셈보 콤바이나 다 띵유도 도시 셈바 삼다메나 디고레 산유 줌네네 삼다나 디고레 안동화셰베 가르 삼다나 디델야 띵딜레데 삼다 안델야 디리샤기 삼제 소소라나게 기위자와 당은 저기 때 이게 사바이나다 다 띵일야 쳐보푸에 만제 푸야다 연자 푸야다 메네자야다 개와카라야 제바나 디니기 제시하는 것도 도시네 어디가 샤고야 되게 모르겠어 어디니게 당한 저기 디링 봐도 셔야돼야지 권마디셔야지 냠네 제데 안디 차대요래
This weekend then we've looked at some absolutely crucial trainings, creating the foundation to become a Buddha, creating this foundation within ourselves to achieve enlightenment. So the way I'd encourage you to utilize what's been presented here in your meditations is you start by recalling the qualities of the body, speech and mind of Buddha Shakyamuni as well as Geshe Rinpoche, and thereby generating the wish, I want to become a perfected being just like you. And being a perfected being, I have confidence that your training is flawless, and I will therefore follow your perfect example and train just like you did, and thereby achieve the same results as you have, as Je Rinpoche has exhorted us to do so many times. Generating that confidence, we have confidence then in their teachings, in particular in this Lamrim tradition, that the complete and unmistaken trainings are presented here in the correct sequence that we need to engage in. Then we start to meditate on the qualities of a teacher, recognizing that it's now in dependence on having met a master of this tradition, a spiritual teacher, that I can make this life truly meaningful. And the best way to repay the tremendous kindness my teacher has shown us is through taking his advice, putting it into practice night and day. And how to do so? Well, I have this precious human rebirth, this amazing, rare opportunity that was so difficult to achieve, but I have done so. I have done so through my own endeavors. But I can't relax and rest on my laurels. I need to recognize that this will not last. It passes in but a blink of an eye, like a flash of lightning. I therefore need to utilize what remains of this life, to utilize it well and live a life of great meaning. Ensure I'm not overcome by the meaningless affairs of this life, but rather I strive for a goal of great meaning. And then we take that meditation further, reflecting on the experiences of beings, including ourselves, but all beings throughout samsara, reflecting on how beings are suffering in the lower realms now, and that potentially awaits us too. But there are vast beings there now enduring unimaginable pain and misery. And in fact, even throughout the human and certainly the God realm too, beings are suffering, and all beings are suffering in the same way, or due to the same reason. The contaminated karma that is ripening in their experience, and that contaminated karma they themselves accumulated under the control of their afflicted minds. These beings need to become freed of this contaminated karma through overcoming or eradicating their own afflicted minds. They need me to become a Buddha for their sake. I need to strive to become the most skilled of guides, so I can guide all beings in the unmistaken path to abandon the afflictions, eradicate the afflictions completely. And who has the ability to guide me to develop the qualities of a Buddha in my own continuum? The three jewels. And with that motivation, one goes for refuge to the three jewels. Here then, one commits to training in the complete practices as presented here in the Lamrim, in order to become a Buddha for the sake of others. Recognizing here with this great joy that has arisen in our mind of how truly fortunate we are, we start by ensuring that we cultivate the complete causes to ensure that lifetime after lifetime we have rebirth with characteristics complete. Here we engage in the meditations of ethical restraint, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and make heartfelt prayer. And we add to this concentration and wisdom, because our goal is enlightenment. And therefore, we train not only in the four causes for precious human rebirth, plus fifthly prayer, but also concentration and wisdom. In this way, we accumulate the causes required. And in addition to accumulating virtue, we need to purify previously accumulated non-virtue. And this we do so through the four opponent powers. And those were briefly mentioned. And in terms of the antidotal power, it can be any virtuous activity, such as the 35 confession Buddhas, or relying on Vajrasattva and reciting the 100-syllable mantra, or relying on Buddha Shakyamuni and reciting his name mantra, or generously and reciting Om Mani Padme Hum, or making offerings, doing circumambulation. Any virtuous activity can serve as the fourth opponent power, but it requires the three preceding opponent powers. So this is how we need to train. Accumulate the correct and complete causes and utilize the four opponent powers, them also in the complete aspect. In this way, we can be sure we'll progress well to achieve a meaningful life.
So
thank you. We'll conclude here. And next week, we'll continue looking at the practices that are shared or in accordance with the practitioner of intermediate capacity.